Hi everyone, Cheryl here. Today is April 14th, 2023, and today I'd like to talk a little bit about medical astrology. I have been working as a practicing astrologer for over 40 years, and one of the things that I sort of got very interested in from an early start was medical astrology. I do regular astrology as well, but because I am a holistic practitioner, I had a very strong draw towards medical astrology to see how the chart was representing different health issues or how we could glean some insight into a person's health and patterns through the use of astrology. And I found that there are many different techniques that are used in medical astrology. I mean, from a basic perspective, the planets themselves all have different rulerships over different parts of the body and functionings of the body. But also, there are other techniques that are used. And one of the techniques that I like to use that I find is very helpful and accurate is the use of midpoints. And so by looking at a midpoint, what we are doing is we are looking at the halfway point between two planets, and it might not have any planets sitting there, and that's not important. What is important is to observe what the transits are, or in other words, the movement of the planets that are happening currently in the sky and how it's moving around over your chart. And when an outer or a planet in the sky is passing over a midpoint, it actually can trigger some health issues that might not have previously existed, or it could cause a flare-up of an existing condition. So each of the planets is correlated to various functions and organs or glands or tissues in the body. And when that midpoint is triggered by an outer planet, that outer planet, or the planet in the sky, also represents another facet of the physical body. So I'll just give an example, a simple example of that. So let's just say that, I have something in my chart where maybe I have, we're looking at the midpoint of, say, Saturn and Mars. Now, Saturn typically represents not just calcium in the body, but osteoblasts and the ability to build bone. And Mars represents, some people say it represents the muscles or iron in the blood, but on another level, it actually is connected to the adrenal glands. And so if you have a midpoint of, say, Saturn, which is connected with osteoblasts and the ability to build bone, and then we have the adrenal glands with Mars, and the midpoint is being passed in the sky by, say, Pluto. Pluto is all about cellular renewal and also breakdown of cells. And it could be a point in time where you may have difficulty in sort of synthesizing the bone and the adrenals. And if we combine that story together with the adrenal glands, perhaps the adrenals are overstimulated, or maybe they're not getting enough support, or perhaps the calcium that's circulating in the blood is not buffering certain acids in the body enough, and the adrenals are getting weak because of inflammation in the body, and that can cause some deterioration with Pluto passing by the midpoint. So it's a more complicated way of looking at health issues, but it actually gleans a huge amount of information. So if we look at each planet as symbolizing a different function in the body or tissues or cells or whatever, and then combining the two factors together, the two different planets, and then we're combining it with a third that is passing by the midpoint. And the reason we look at midpoints, and I think I've explained this in a previous video, is if you imagine you have like two posts and you've tied a rope between these two posts and tied it as tight as you can. The weak spot is right in the middle. That rope will still flop up and down in the very middle, no matter how tight you seem to tie that rope on either end. And so those two individual planets could be strong on their own, but when the midpoint is activated by some kind of transit, it could activate a weakness, or depending on the planet that's involved. I mean, if you have a planet that's considered a benefic as opposed to malefic, or a good versus a bad, I hate to say it in those simple terms, but I'm just trying to explain it. If you have different energies affecting it, it will create a different effect. So when I think of Pluto, it can go either way. I mean, it has the ability to regenerate cells, but it is also a planet that destroys the cells and breaks them down in order for them to be renewed. And so this could imply a weakness when we're looking at the combination midpoint of Saturn and Mars together. And that could influence maybe that the adrenals will suddenly become weak, or that calcium metabolism and bone building isn't functioning at its best because of the stress, the adrenal stress. And it tells a story, basically. And so, not that anybody is diagnosing anything in astrology. We are not. Medical astrology is viewed as a way of gleaning insight into what to watch for. And if a certain transit was happening, or if I have a client that's coming to me and says, I have this symptom, this symptom, this symptom, and they're interested in astrology, I would run up their midpoints, look at their charts, look at the transits, look at the progressions, look at all of the factors that are coming into play with current conditions, and looking at those midpoints. And what it can provide is some insight as to how to support the body in the best possible way. And if there was something that was even more serious, as to how to approach even discussing with your doctor possible tests to run or possible things to look at. Now, again, that would depend on the open-mindedness of the doctor and whether you had a holistic doctor or not. But if they were just coming to me as a holistic practitioner, I am only looking at this as a way of how to support the person with their nutrition, with herbal and vitamin allies and support, with supplementation. So in this case, with Mars and the adrenals and Saturn and the osteoblasts and bone building and calcium metabolism, and Pluto involved on that midpoint, it could call for some adrenal support, supplements that help to support the adrenals, and at the same time making sure that the body wasn't too acidic, because when the body is too acidic, calcium is leached from the bones to buffer that acidity in the blood, to maintain the proper pH in the blood at all times. The body will sacrifice what it has to sacrifice in order to make sure that that pH is always in the proper range. And so doing things that are going to help with creating less acidity in the body, change of diet, and I'm not talking acid foods, but acid forming foods. So cutting back on certain meats and certain carbs, and alkalizing foods, foods like greens and various vegetables and fruits that will help to support that, and things like chlorophyll and all of that. And then, of course, supporting the adrenal glands with the many supplements that do that. I won't go into detail about all that right now, but you get the idea that there can be a very complex story that's told by this one combination of, two planets, their midpoint, and then one planet passing over that midpoint. So I also provide a transit consultation for health purposes if there's concerns with the chart and health. And the midpoints are an amazing tool to use for medical astrology. Now, there are many books that are written about medical astrology, and more so recently. I've been studying it for a very long time, since the 70s and 80s, and I have also been given information from spirit and my guides about some additional information, and maybe it might be similar to what's been written about, but I've also got an additional layer of information with regard to what the planets represent. And I'm not saying I have exclusive information, but I have that ability and that capability, and it does provide extra information that I can help to provide for my client, or help my clients with, and provide that information. So, I know that many people will say the sun represents vitality, and that's true. Um, I have a tendency to look at the sun in the chart as representing more of the heart and the circulation. Um, and other astrologers might look at it differently. I look at, like I said, Mars has to do with not only, I know it can rule the muscles, but it specifically for me, I feel it has to do with the adrenal glands. And that seems to fit with what I'm doing with the assessments that I do. And it reflects the energy that you have. Because if your adrenals are overworked or strained, or you're, burning the candle at both ends, your energy is going to plummet. And so I feel like Mars represents that, and that's what I've been told by, spirit. Um, Venus is connected to the kidneys and fluid balance and um, blood pressure, but it also has to do with sugars in the body. And quite often, um, diabetics will have issues with sugar, obviously, but with the kidneys as well, and the filtration system that has to take place, and the fluid balance and the blood pressure, that's all connected. So quite often, or I have seen this, it's not a given all the time, but I have seen diabetics quite often will have blood pressure issues, and that is the correlating factor there. It has to do with the kidneys, and I see that as being reflected with Venus in the chart. Mercury, I feel, is connected to the hypothalamus and the pituitary, and the pituitary gland is sort of the master gland in regulating the other glands. And so when you think of Mercury as the messenger, it kind of makes sense that the pituitary would be like the messenger of the glands, and providing and giving direction and sending up messages to all the other glands on how to um, coordinate, as well as to transfer hormone information and balance. Um, and like I mentioned, Saturn, I see it not only for calcium metabolism, but also the ability to build bone, the osteoblasts. Um, and I know that seems very similar, but it's a different process. There's more to building bone than just the calcium. It's the actual physiological response that has to take place. And so Saturn, I feel, is connected to that process. And then with Jupiter, we're looking at, the liver and fat metabolism. And fat metabolism isn't just about the fat we eat, but it's about the fats in the blood and cholesterol and triglycerides and those kind of things that are taking place in the body as well. And I think that, the liver does so many things. I mean, there's hundreds of chemical processes that take place in the liver, and it's fitting that Jupiter, being the largest planet in the solar system, has a big job, with the liver, being the big planet. And, fat metabolism is very critical for the brain function as well as, just being able to provide energy on a higher level rather than just using sugars or carbs for energy. If we're using our fats for energy, we are getting a bit of a higher energy level as a result. And so it's a little more, I guess, expansive, but we need to have a healthy liver in order to utilize that effectively. And so again, I'm just sort of reviewing what my take on some of these planets are, only because I've read many, many books on medical astrology and studied that. But these are my correlations that I've been given from, like I said, from my guides and spirit. So when we come to Uranus, we're looking at it. I think it's connected to our gray matter and also our neuron firing. It's the electricity of the brain. And so, when we have different midpoints involved, and depending on where Uranus is in, correlation with another planet and what planet is passing by, you can understand how or why somebody might suddenly be feeling like they have brain fog, or they might have their memory not as good or as sharp, depending on the planets that are actively involved in that whole transit pattern, as well as when we're looking at it from this medical astrology perspective. When it comes to Neptune, not only is Neptune connected to the immune system and the lymphatic system, but I've been told it's very specifically linked to the neutrophils, which are a particular kind of white cell or white blood cell. And so that again is obviously connected to the immune system, but that specifically is what I've been seeing that correlation with. When it comes to Pluto, it's the cell nucleus. It is the furnace of the cell. It is the metabolism of the cell, and so it has to do with cell renewal, repair, or breakdown of the cell, to regenerate itself and to renew itself. We also have some asteroids that come into play, and I'm not going to get into all of them, but with Chiron, which is, one that's referred to as the wounded healer, that particular asteroid has to do with the electrical current within the body itself, and has to do a lot with the chakras. I feel like it is connected to the main chakra and energy. When we look at Pallas Athene, where I feel that that is connected with muscle tone and magnesium in the body. Again, other books are going to say maybe different things, but this is what I feel works for me, and it correlates with what techniques I use. And then when I look at the asteroid Vesta, now Vesta is, I believe, is some sort of symbolic of the hearth and the home fires. It has to do with the blood plasma and the blood and the iron levels and how they're functioning. And then when we come to the moon, because I didn't talk about the moon earlier, this has to do with chi, it has to do with energy flow, and energy flow along the nadi, or the other channels besides the meridians. It's the subtle pathways that connect to the chakras. And so we have a huge network of these tiny nadi channels and nadi is spelled N-E-D-I-S. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. I think I am. So those subtle energy flows are connected to the moon. And I know the moon also is connected to fluids in the body and sacs or hollow organs, like the stomach, and it's also connected to the breasts, but it is connected to those subtle energy flows of chi through the body. And it is also connected to potassium, which helps with fluid regulation to a certain extent, because of the moon symbolizing the tides and the water ebb and flow. With the tides, we also have that water in our body, which we are 70 to 80% water, much like the earth. So the tides and the fluid in our body ebbs and flows, and potassium helps to regulate some of that. And it also is connected to, I know this sounds weird, but if you think that potassium has to do with the fluid regulation, and electricity can pass into liquid very easily, I feel like it has to do with a certain amount of electrical energy that is transferred. So I like to think of it as it's connected to arcing, if that makes any sense, electrical flow in the body. So I just wanted to share a little bit about, astrology from that medical perspective, and there's so much more I could talk about. I mean, it's really much more complex and complicated than I'm oversimplifying it for my purpose of sharing some information with you to sort of help introduce you to this concept and how valuable, looking at your chart from this health perspective can be, but also how it can correlate with the transits, because health issues sometimes are not an issue, and then all of a sudden at a certain time frame it pops up. And why? And it's usually correlated to a particular timing of a transit that's hovering over a midpoint, or is hovering over, sometimes we have a planet that actually sits at a midpoint between two other planets in our chart. And then there's a fourth factor of the moving planet in the sky that passes over that, and that creates an even more complicated pattern and more intense health kind of issue that can pop up. The other thing that I pay attention to are, when I'm looking at health issues, is the concept of critical degrees. Now, I believe this was used in old astrology. Critical degrees are certain degrees within the cardinal, fixed, and mutable signs that occur at certain numbers, and I won't get into all of that, but they're referred to as critical degrees. And what I've observed with critical degrees, because I watch them all the time, is that if a person has planets in critical degrees, it is an opportunity for great strength or great weakness. It can go either way, and depending on the circumstance. So I'm going to cite an example of someone that I knew that had their Sun and Mars in critical degree in Capricorn. And this person, at a specific age, which correlated with a specific transit, was accidentally shot, and they got shot and it affected their spine. They became paraplegic. Now, when you think of Mars, Mars also rules weapons and guns, and Capricorn rules the knees and is correlated to indirectly Saturn, the bones. And so, this person was shot in the spine and lost the use of their legs and was in a wheelchair. Now, this occurred when they were approximately 13 years of age. And so that critical degree created a situation for them where they had, they suffered through that at a very pivotal time in their life during puberty development, when they're exploring themselves more and becoming their own person a little bit more. And so it impacted them in a way where they had to, I guess, for lack of a better phrasing, they had to suck it up and try to come to terms with it, and find a new way of doing things, and to be successful in life, because Capricorn is a sign that wants to achieve, it wants to, be out in the world. Now, this person did go on to become a manager and a significant person in their chosen field. And so they were able to, overcome that great challenge, but it wasn't without its own hurdles, for sure. Using your legs, and that, and then knowing what that is all about, and then losing the use of your legs can present some serious emotional challenges too. And so I can only imagine, I don't know for sure, I can only imagine that as a young, teenage boy, there was probably an awful lot of anger going on. And again, Mars has to do with anger. And I would imagine there could have been a situation where they were angry at the world or angry about their plight and their situation. But this person with the critical degree used a great devastating event, and it propelled them and I'm going to say this not in the sense like, oh, world greatness, but it propelled them into greatness. It helped them to achieve, because they had to work hard and apply themselves in a different way in order to accomplish what they wanted to accomplish. And they did, which, kudos to them. They were able to do that. And so this is an indication or an example of a critical degree, how it can function as a devastating or a challenging experience, and turning it around into a experience where it propels them to do something and to act in a way that will still help them to achieve their goals. So that is also taken into consideration when I'm doing medical astrology, because the critical degrees can show where there can be some health problems as well. And so when we look at medical astrology, we're looking at what is called crosses. So I look at what the dominant cross is in the chart. And what I mean by that is if we have all the cardinal signs are sort of prominent in the chart, that is referred to as a cardinal cross. If all of the fixed signs, so the cardinal signs are Capricorn, Cancer, and Aries and Libra. So if those planets are, or if planets are in those cardinal signs more in the chart, then we have a cardinal cross. And when there is a cardinal cross, we often will look to the dominant sign in the cardinal cross. And so in this person's case, we would look to, Capricorn, because that was very prominent in their chart. And we also look to the feeding sign prior in the cross. So the sign before Capricorn, that is cardinal, is Libra. And when we look at Libra, Libra is ruled by Venus. Venus is correlated to the kidneys. And this person also ended up having a kidney removed and had blood pressure issues. So we can see how this all unfolds, and the timing of these things were also activated by transits over the midpoints, transits over those planets, and there's so much information that can be gleaned from a health perspective when we're looking at midpoints, when we're looking at the planets as symbolizing different functions in the body. And actually, there are correlating. I have many books on medical astrology, and I have books that talk about all 360 degrees of the zodiac and how each degree is linked to specific physiological functions in the body. So if we start to get very, very detailed, we can actually pinpoint very, very specifically which area of the body is being affected, as well as what is happening on a larger scale with the different midpoints and the transits. And so depending on the degree that's being activated, depending on what the midpoint is, if there's a planet sitting at the midpoint in the chart, and then in the heavens there's that other passing by planet that could be triggering that midpoint. So this is a whole very detailed picture, and that's what I provide when I'm doing a medical astrology assessment for somebody to help them with their health concerns. And it also helps us to sort of define a path of nutritional support and various energetic supports if necessary. I hope that wasn't too convoluted or complicated or hard to understand. I tried to keep it simple for today, but if you are interested in having a medical astrology session, I do provide, a consultation along with, charts, and usually a consultation for medical astrology is not just 1 hour, it's usually a 2-hour session, so the fee is a little bit higher. That is on my website, and I can work with anybody from any location for this. I just need accurate birth data, time of birth within, accuracy within 5 minutes preferably, as well as, the place of birth and of course the date. So if you're interested in pursuing some medical astrology, you can always see the scroll going across the screen, and you can contact me that way. I hope you found this information helpful, and I hope it helps to open your eyes on the different ways astrology can offer some guidance and support. Have a fabulous day.